All right, everybody. I want to welcome you to today's Bible study, and we're grateful to have you here in this room, and those of you that are joining us online, and we're glad to have you as well today. So today we're going to be in Exodus 5. I think you have an outline there for you on your tables, I believe, and so you can look at that, and if you're online, we'll have that outline available for you as well. And we'll do Exodus 5 and a little bit of Exodus 6 today as we begin the journey, as I titled the lesson of the journey toward freedom begins. So let's start in the opening section where Moses and Aaron are finally before Pharaoh. So let's look at Exodus 5, verse 1. Afterward, now remember, Moses and Aaron have just met with the elders of Israel, kind of explain to them what they're going to do. And if you remember right at the end of chapter 4, it says when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped. So the elders of Israel are on board with Moses and with Aaron in this journey. We're not really sure what happened to them. If you go back to chapter 3, verse 18, the text says, the elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt, and et cetera, et cetera. We get to chapter 5, and it doesn't seem like the elders of Israel went with Moses and Aaron to the king. So not sure if they're just not listed in the conversation or whether they actually went or not. That's one of those things we don't know for sure. We only know about Moses and Aaron. But after they'd had this meeting, with the leaders of Israel, they go to Pharaoh. And they said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, let my people go, that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. And then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey in the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword. And the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. And Pharaoh said, look, the people of this land are now numerous, and you're stopping them from working. So the encounter between Yahweh and the gods of Egypt is really what's about to happen. Pharaoh is going to be representative, if you will, a physical representative, an authoritative representative of all of the gods of Egypt. And the Lord, Yahweh, is about to encounter them one by one. Okay? That's what's about to unfold in front of us. I want you to notice for the first time, we have that saying that will become very familiar to us in the prophetic material. The NIV translates it like this in verse 1. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. And the text actually says, the way it's translated typically in the Old King James is, thus saith the Lord. Okay? Now, it was common in some of the ancient communications to begin a conversation that way. Like we have records of where if you go back to about 1,000 years BC or so, somewhere in that neighborhood, 1100 maybe, we do have some records of correspondence between kings and pharaohs. And it wasn't uncommon for a correspondence to begin by saying, thus saith so-and-so, whoever it might be. And then usually it would be who they were. You know, thus saith so-and-so, king of Aram or whatever. So Moses uses that in this communication. And he says, thus saith the Lord. You see the Lord in all caps. Remember, anytime in your English translation you see all caps, that's Yahweh, the covenant name of God. And then he tells him who Yahweh is. I mean, Pharaoh doesn't know who Yahweh is. Who is Yahweh? Well, he's the God of Israel. And so the message is one for freedom and service. So notice how Moses and Aaron put it. Let my people go. They're going to say that to Pharaoh numerous times. Now, I'm not sure what y'all are thinking about Moses and Pharaoh. Could it be possible that what they're thinking is they're going in with a staff, maybe both of them have a staff, Aaron and Moses, and they have been given special instruction by God about what's going to happen. God has let them know that he's going to deliver the children of Israel from Egypt. Do you think they have in their mind that Pharaoh's going to say, wow, okay, I had no idea that God wanted these people to leave. So, great. Y'all, when do y'all need to go? I'm not sure what they were anticipating, but to me it feels like right now they're pretty bold in their perspective. They're making a direct statement to the most powerful man that they will ever encounter on earth, at least, a human being, and that's Pharaoh. He's the king of Egypt. Now, you might ask the question, well, how in the world did Moses and Aaron get in to see Pharaoh? What did you do? Did you, set up a Zoom meeting, or did you do an email contact? How did you get to go see Pharaoh? Well, believe it or not, in the ancient world, kings made it a point to have appointment days to meet with anybody. And so it was a very common practice in the ancient world. It was one of the ways that they tried to communicate that everybody had access to the most powerful person in their life. And so it just wasn't uncommon for kings to have audiences, if you will, with anybody that could find their way to the king and make sure that they were able to show up on time or whatever. So now you could argue the reason Moses had access to Pharaoh is because Pharaoh knew Moses. And there's also some credibility to that view. So I'd probably put both of those together. The fact that kings were accustomed to meeting with anybody that had an opportunity or need to meet with them. Sometimes the king, they would meet with him because they wanted the king to exact justice right then. They wanted him to make a decision. What about this? What about that? You remember we have that example with Solomon, where folks would come to Solomon and say, can you fix this? Would you address this? Could you give us a just decision about this? So it was just common in the ancient world. But probably it was also complemented by the fact that Moses knew this Pharaoh. Presumably, they would have been colleagues. Maybe had even grown up together. We don't know that for sure, but that certainly can be an implication here. But regardless, that's the demand. Now, isn't it interesting what they ask for? So look at verse 1. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me out in the wilderness. Then you get to verse 3. They said, we would like to take about a 3-day journey and offer sacrifices to our God. Now, you have two different views about that request. One view says that that's exactly what they were just asking for. They were looking for an open door from Pharaoh to let the children of Israel temporarily make a journey out in the wilderness, have some type of a worship service before the Lord, come back to Egypt, and then perhaps begin a process of redemption and deliverance, however that may look. But a number of scholars disagree with that. And a number of scholars say when you actually research the way people negotiated in the ancient world, it was fairly common to begin by asking for something that you knew in reality was going to be much bigger than the original ask. This was just to, so to speak, be kind, gracious, and ease into the conversation. Does that make sense? In other words, he didn't say, let my people go forever. He starts off by saying, can we go for 3 days? And according to what a number of commentators believe, is that was kind of a method of communication in the ancient world. There was nothing necessarily dishonest about it. It's just the way negotiations were typically made. Sometimes we have a little bit of that in our culture. If you go to buy something and it's a bartering kind of relationship, you don't normally start off by telling the person what you're willing to pay, right? That is not where you start. And you will say, well, I'll give you this much for it, but in your mind you're thinking, well, actually I'm going to give this much if I can get him to come down to this much. So there's some of that going on, we think. Regardless, I'm not sure which is the best place to land. I think the bottom line is this is going to be the core request. Let my people go, and let them go for a reason. So when you look at the requests in the book of Exodus, it really connects to what we should believe about freedom, and that is that we're set free to serve the Lord. You're not just set free for freedom's sake. You're liberated to serve God. So they're going to exchange the life they have in Egypt, working as slaves, and they're going to enter into a relationship with God, and they're going to be His servants. And so that's really how freedom is taught in the Scripture. Because sometimes when we talk about freedom, we almost view freedom as just the absence of restraint. If I'm going to be free, that means I can just do whatever I want to do. And when all actuality, that's not really what freedom is, and that's certainly not what freedom is in the Scripture. It doesn't mean that all restraint has been removed. You're set free from what imprisons you as a sinner, as a broken person, these people as slaves, and you're going to be delivered so that you might live in freedom in a relationship with God that will be full of restraints. It will be, but it'll be of a very different nature, and it's actually where you're going to find life. There's great freedom in it. And sometimes freedom comes in that context of hard work and discipline. You know, just like right now, there are some of you in this room that have studied piano, and you've taken piano lessons, and you can read music, okay? And you have music memorized. And if I were to call upon you, you could get up right now and go over here to this piano and just freely play. True? I have never had a piano lesson in my life. I can't read music, and I have nothing memorized, and I could go over here and freely play also. True? I could. I could go over here. There are 88 keys on that piano. I could find every single one of them in whatever order I want to put them in, as loud as I want to play them, and I would be in complete freedom. But it would mean nothing. But the person who has disciplined themselves and learned, they can play in freedom. Does that make sense? So freedom, it doesn't mean a loss of restraint. It means to live purposefully into the will of God. That's what real freedom is. That's where you find life. And that's what God is saying to these people. I'm going to deliver you, but you're going to come worship me. You're going to engage in not just in this festival, so to speak, but you're going to live sacrificially in my presence from now on. That's really what's at stake here, and that's what's going to be asked of Israel. Well, I want you to notice verse 6, Pharaoh's heart is already hard. He doesn't have to be hardened by God yet. Pharaoh is already hard-hearted. He's a pagan king, and he has no compassion for these people. This is just not something that is in any way going to be consistent with his view of who the Israelites are to him. They're slaves. They are there to accomplish his purpose. And so look at verse 6. That same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and the overseers in charge of the people. Now, the way we read this, the slave drivers are Egyptian, the overseers are Israelites. Okay? You're no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks before. Don't reduce the quota. They're lazy. That's why they're crying out, let us go and sacrifice to our God. Make the work harder for the people so they keep working and pay no attention to lies. So Pharaoh's response is swift and vengeful. His heart is hard from the very beginning. And the Israelites will now suffer his wrath. Their workloads increase greatly. You know, they're making these bricks with the clay and the mud and the water, and they mix it with some combination of straw or stubble. The straw was actually provided. You know, the straw was what was left over whenever the harvest would take place. They would gather up the straw in bundles and have them delivered to these brick-making factories. And obviously it made the work more efficient. Well, now what Pharaoh's saying is, you're going to have to go out in the fields yourself. You got to go find all this yourself. But meanwhile, you got to make the same number of bricks you've been making. Okay? And so this, if you look at verse 12, well, the people scattered all over Egypt because now they're looking for stubble to use for straw. In other words, they're not going to be provided the best kind of straw that they would need. Now it's going to be something less than, and it's going to require more work because you need more of it. The implication is stubble, you need more stubble than you do straw. So their workload has increased commensurately. So the people of God suffered even more after this initial encounter between Moses and Aaron and the king of Egypt. Now, in Pharaoh's mind, perhaps what he's thinking is, making these people work at this level is what has kept them at bay up to this point. Now, I've got to restore them back to understanding they're slaves, so maybe if I just increase their work, that'll restore them back to their proper position. They'll quit thinking about the fact that they might actually get freedom. That seems to be dangling in front of them. So what's worked so far is making them work really hard. So I'll make them work even harder. And I think in his mind, evidently, he's thinking that's what's going to work. Okay? So if you keep reading the story, the Israelite, verse 15, the Israelite overseers, they appealed to Pharaoh. Why have you treated us this way? You've given us no straw. And so it just gets worse. So you come to verse 18. The Israelite overseers realized they were in trouble when they were told you're not to reduce the number of bricks required for each day. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them. And they said, may the Lord look on you and judge you. You've made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and put a sword in their hand to kill us. So now the leaders, the overseers of the people, who, according to the text just prior, many of them had bowed and worshiped God. They had heard this word from Moses. God's going to deliver them. Well, now they're recognizing that this is going to be a different kind of journey than they were imagining. This is going to be a costly journey. And so they confront Moses and Aaron. You know, what I'm presuming is that Moses and Aaron were hopeful that they would get a favorable hearing from Pharaoh, and they'd have an opportunity to meet with these leaders and these overseers, and there'd be a great time of celebration and thanksgiving, and man, can you believe what God has done? But instead, this is what they get. Why have you done this? Why did you come here and bring this to us? You know, we were already slaves, but at least we had some help. At least we had a reasonable work environment. Something was expected of us, and now look at what's been done to us, and it's your fault. Okay, so Moses and the Lord. What does Moses do here now after this has happened? Well, let's look at verse 22. Moses returns to the Lord, and he said, why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. So Moses comes now to the Lord with his complaint. Moses just says, and you know, I want to give Moses a little credit here. This is a challenging situation, you know. And not only is he in disfavor in the eyes of Pharaoh, he's now in disfavor in the eyes of his own people. So he is in, my mama used to say, between a rock and a hard place. I don't know if y'all say that here in Texas or not, but he's in a bind here, because where's he going to turn to for encouragement and support? He can't turn to these guys because they're looking at him and saying, you've just made, our life was already miserable. And you weren't living here. You didn't have to experience it. You don't know what it's been like. And now you show up, and it's now compounded because of what you've done. So Moses feels the weight of that. So I don't blame Moses for having this sense that he needs some kind of reassurance from God. So if you look at chapter 6, verse 1, so here's how God responds to Moses. The Lord said to Moses, now, you'll see what I'll do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of this country. And then God said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord. I did not make myself fully known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I've heard the groaning of the Israelites whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I've remembered my covenant. So now here's Exodus in summary. Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you up. I'll bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves of them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people. I will be your God. Then you will know that I'm the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with an uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. That's really the story of Exodus in a nutshell. So verse 9, Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they didn't listen to him because of their discouragement and their harsh labor. You know, sometimes when you're discouraged and you're in a season of despair, it's hard to hear good news. In fact, it's hard to hear any news and believe it's good, regardless, because your perspective is so contextualized by your suffering. And that's where these people are. They're like, Moses, we hear you, but dude, we got to make bricks in the morning. more than we did yesterday. Our lives are worse. So the Lord said to Moses, go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, let these Israelites go out of his country. Moses said to the Lord, if the Israelites won't listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me? And here's an interesting phrase. Here's what it says in Hebrew. Y'all may remember our conversation last week. Here's what he says. Here's how the NIV translates it, very politely. Since I speak with faltering lips. The Hebrew says, since my lips are uncircumcised. Now that's a graphic image. Harkens back to an experience we talked about last week he had with God, though, remember? He's already been punished for not circumcising his son. You remember that story? He uses that very same image and says, so obviously, you spared my life, you spared my son's life, however you interpret that text. Now here I am, and here's how it looks to me. I'm still uncircumcised. My own people won't listen to me. So why would I think that Pharaoh's going to listen to me? I've already been to see Pharaoh. And again, I don't want to be too judgmental about Moses. I get it. I can only imagine how challenging this was. The compassion of God is going to be on display here, though. The Lord is going to be patient with Moses. The Lord understands how hard this is. And so just as I put in your notes, leadership is a lonely journey. It's not for the faint of heart. And if you don't believe that, then go lead something. Leaders are often lonely people. There's a reason for that. Because leaders sometimes carry things in their hearts that nobody else knows. And so when they're misunderstood and you're not able to share what you know, it kind of leaves you in a vulnerable position. Moses knows what God's told him to do. He knows how he's been instructed. He knows what he believes the Lord has put in front of him. But as he's doing it, he's being assaulted on all fronts. And that leaves him in a very vulnerable position. Who's he going to confide in? Well, the only person really that he can confide in is God. That's really what he's doing. Because, if he goes to the Israelite leaders, well, they're looking at his leadership from one perspective. If he goes to Pharaoh, he's looking at his leadership from another perspective. It's a lonely spot. And any of you that have ever been in leadership, you know that. I would tell you that I understand that. There are times when I have felt led to do things that people misunderstand. I get it. It's just a challenging thing sometimes. But sometimes, and it's always hard to say to somebody, because this sounds very arrogant, to say, well, you don't know everything I know. That's an arrogant statement, because that doesn't always land well. And so leadership requires a lot of nuance and dexterity, and it just takes a lot out of a person. Not everybody's cut out for it. But Moses is in that spot. This is what God's called him to do. He's going to have to figure out how to do it. And he's going to have to learn how to live in the loneliness of it sometimes, because God's going to continue to reassure him. And also, what we're learning about God here is that for some reason, God does not synchronize his watch with mine. And I cannot tell you how many times I've asked him to do it, to let him know, okay, let's sync up here now. It's 0600. This is going to be done by tonight, right? Obviously. Well, actually, the Lord keeps time very differently than we do. And his plans are different than ours. What's the Lord getting ready to do here? Well, here's what's about to happen. God is about to capture the hearts and the minds and the imagination of the Israelite people, and then later the entire Christian family with this story. This is going to be the story of the Old Testament once the world is created. This story of deliverance, this story of rescue, of liberation, this image of the Exodus. So much of it is going to be woven into everything we know. What is Jesus going to do when right off the bat, very early in his ministry? Where is he going to go? He's going to be led by the Spirit of God where? Into the wilderness. And how long is he going to be in the wilderness? A couple of weeks? 40. How long were the children of Israel in the wilderness? 40 years. Jesus is going to go in the wilderness for how long? 40 days. And he's going to experience the demands of being in the wilderness. And then we're going to read this story later where the angel of death is going to come to an Israelite's home, and what's he going to do? He's going to pass over and he's going to pass over. Why? What's the angel of death going to see on the doorpost of that Jewish home? The blood of the Lamb. Y'all are with me, right? I mean, what's going to happen to us one day? The blood of the Lamb is going to be spilled for us one day. I mean, there are so many things at play here in this story that Moses has no idea about. He has no clue that God has this huge, massive, expansive, redemptive plan that's going to communicate so much about him and is going to lay the foundation for so much theological formation and is going to communicate and foreshadow much of what Christ is going to do for the entire world. That's not going to happen overnight. It's just not. This is going to be a thorough, absolute vindication of the Lord God Almighty, the God of Israel. He is going to completely and absolutely defeat the gods of the Egyptians, and he's going to deliver these people in an unforgettable fashion, and he's going to sow the seeds of theological formulation along the way. So there's a huge plan here with God, and he's going to call on Moses to play his role in it. But Moses is going to have to learn that God doesn't do everything in your time. Just because God's involved doesn't mean it's going to get resolved tonight. It's just how it works with him. We have to trust him because sometimes the things he's working on takes a little bit longer than what you might imagine. But I would be honest enough to say this to y'all. He's really good at what he does, and he's very thorough. You know what I mean by that? He's very thorough. You know, at our house, we have what we call clean and Cindy clean. Those are just two different things. When you see your wife standing at the kitchen sink with the faucet, with a toothbrush cleaning, that you don't ever see me do that. I do dentist clean. I pick up and make sure everything, Cindy clean is deep. When God is going to do what God's going to do, what I've learned about God is he is just very thorough. And he's going to uproot, and he's going to plant, and he's going to take his time, and he's going to produce what he chooses to produce, and he's going to do it in his own way, in his own will, according to his own power and his plan. And I've learned I'm better off at cooperating than negotiating. So, all right, so points to consider. God's will is always best. You know, it's just always best. God has never been wrong, not one time. He's just not ever wrong. God's knowledge is perfect. Y'all have heard me say before, Madeline Lingle likes to say that you have a point of view, I have a point of view, God has view. God sees it all, God knows it all, and we have to trust him. He has a plan. He has a plan right here. This plan right here is like I said, it's a comprehensive, spiritually formative, theologically rooted plan that's in the very heart of God that has got to take place. And Moses is going to have to live in it. Second, freedom is really found only in a relationship with God. You don't find freedom by just throwing off all the shackles and just being completely unbounded. That's not real freedom. Freedom is found when you connect yourself to the truth. What did Jesus say? You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's what the truth does. And he will say, I am the truth. So coming to know the Lord is where we actually find real freedom. It's discovered in a relationship with him. It's not found in the absence of boundaries. That's not really what freedom is. Freedom is something that has restraints built in, but they're restraints that are built in for your good and to serve the very purposes of God. Moses and these people are going to be set free, but not just to be free to be free. God is going to call them. We're going to read in Exodus 19. He says, this is my plan for you. I want you to be called by my name, and I want you to be a holy nation and a kingdom of priests. That's the calling of God on these people. He's asking them to now leave the slavery of Egypt and now live into a relationship with him that will allow them to be a part of his purpose and his plan and his will. That's where real freedom is found, still the truth today. I'd say third, God is concerned about our relationship with him. One of the things I've learned about God is relationships are very important to him, and particularly his relationship between him and us. God's a covenantal God. In fact, we've heard that in this very story. He said, I appeared to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. I didn't make myself fully known yet, but I'm beginning to do that with you. And I've given you my personal name, Yahweh. And I want to have this personal relationship with you. As a matter of fact, remember last week he said, Israel's my firstborn. Israel is like my child. And so God is deeply personally related to Israel. He's certainly that way today. God's interested in a relationship with you. And so I would just tell you, sometimes when we find ourselves in challenging circumstances, one of the things that's happening is that God is calling you into a deeper walk with Him. He wants you to learn how to more trust Him and be with Him rather than Him always just fixing everything, which is usually our focus. Sometimes we're not all that interested in getting to know God better. We're more interested in God making my life better. So if you'll just make my life better, I don't really need to know you that well, be honest with you. It's almost like God is my wingman. He's just kind of there to, kind of just make it better and pave the road for me and let me call on Him. When God is actually calling all of us into a deep walk with Him so that the character that really identifies who He is can be on display in us, that's going to be a part of the theology of the book of Exodus. He's going to display His glory. And when He does that, what He's trying to tell us is, this is what I want to see in you. I want you to recognize this is my challenge and call in your life. Let me show you who I am so you can now realize who you need to become. And it's only done in relationship with Him. And He's very concerned about that. So just know, He's interested in your life with Him. You may think, well, who am I? Well, you're somebody that He loves. He's created. He's redeemed. He knows your name. He knows the number of hairs on your head. He knew when you were knit in your mother's womb. He knows everything about you, and He loves you. And He wants to use you for His glory. And so you're important to Him. And then finally, maybe the hardest lesson that we have to learn is obedience is costly to everybody. Cindy and I have been many, many times, we've gone through the Henry Blackaby study, Experiencing God. I don't know if I think many of y'all are familiar with that study. And one of the principles of Henry Blackaby, Henry died just the other day, by the way. One of the principles that Henry teaches in that material is obedience is costly to you and those around you. Moses is being obedient, true? He's just doing what God told him to do. And look at the cost. It's costing the Israelites something. It's costing him something. Obedience is, again, it's not something we do to make our life better. It's something we do to please God. And it can be really hard when we're obedient to the Lord. And it can be very costly. Sometimes you make decisions about being obedient to God, and it means that things will have to change in your life. And when those things change, it impacts and affects the lives of people that are around you. That's just how it works. Moses was living his life, in Midian, and he had established a brand new life. He was a part of Jethro's family. They had children. And then one day he looks at Jethro and says, I'm leaving. I'm going back to Egypt, and I'm taking my family with me. Now, at some point, Moses' family is going to rejoin Jethro because Jethro is going to bring them to Moses in Exodus 18. But the point is, it was costly to Moses' wife and family to be obedient to God. Well, it's costly to these people when they're being willing to follow what God is saying to them. So obedience is never easy. If it were, everybody would do it. It would be it wouldn't be that big a deal. It's hard to obey God because God is at work so often in such a bigger plan than we could ever imagine, and our role in it is important. And we don't even know sometimes why we need to be obedient. We don't know the importance of our little cog in the wheel, and that if we're missing, how it throws everything off. But if we'll be obedient and we're being used by the Lord, it will impact others. Just like obedience is costly, but it can also be a great blessing to the people who are around you. And so Moses is going to have to learn that lesson, and we're going to just see that played out over and over and over in this story. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop right there. If you're joining us online, thank you. Bless you. We'll see you next week. Okay?